So today, we're going to dive into the truly groundbreaking ideas of the Indian sociologist Sharmila Reddy. She was a scholar who saw education not just a way to, learn facts, but as this beautiful and creative tool for actually building a more just world. Now, get this. This incredibly powerful challenge wasn't written last year or even last decade. This was written way back in 1855 by a 14-year-old student from a marginalized caste. It just perfectly sets the stage for this long, long history of questioning who gets to decide what knowledge is, a tradition that Sharmila Reddy would brilliantly carry forward into our own time. So, who exactly was Sharmila Reddy? Well, she was a thinker who absolutely refused to see the classroom and the world as two separate things. For her, learning was political. And the real work of thinking and understanding, that was a vital part of the struggle for justice. Her pioneering work, which you can see collected here, did something amazing. She wove together the lived struggles of Dalit women with the really rich history of anti-caste thought. And in doing so, she forged these entirely new, super creative ways of seeing and understanding Indian society. Okay, so Reach put her finger on a really fundamental problem. She saw that mainstream sociology and, yeah, even a lot of mainstream feminism in India had this massive blind spot. It talked a lot about women, but it often completely failed to see how the rigid structure of caste fundamentally shaped women's lives. And the consequence of that, well, it was profound. By not even accounting for caste, the specific struggles, the unique resilience, and, this is key, the critical insights of Dalit women were just erased. The whole picture of social reality was completely, fundamentally incomplete. Let's break this down, because this contrast reveals a huge gap. On one side, you have this mainstream idea of a universal sisterhood, right? Everyone fighting a single enemy, patriarchy. But Rashi shows us a far more complex reality for Dalit women who are facing this double burden of both caste and gender oppression. She gave it a name, Brahmanomical patriarchy, a system where the caste hierarchy and patriarchal control basically prop each other up. So what was Rege's answer to this problem? She didn't just critique the old way of doing things. She offered this beautiful and powerful new framework for actually creating knowledge. And this is it. The Dalit feminist standpoint. At its core, it's a pretty radical idea. It argues that truth isn't some objective thing just floating out there in space. Instead, a more complete, a more real truth emerges when you actually listen to the people who've been pushed to the margins. Their experience isn't just a story. It's essential data for understanding how society actually works. Okay, so why does this whole concept of a standpoint matter so much? I mean, what does it actually change? Well, it pretty much changes everything. It tells us that where you stand completely determines what you can see. It says, hey, your personal experience, that's a legitimate form of evidence. And most crucially, it argues that the view from the margins, from the very bottom of the social ladder, can reveal all the cracks and contradictions in a system that are totally invisible to the people at the top. And this is where Reja's work becomes so inspiring. You know, she didn't just write about these big ideas in a book somewhere. She brought them to life. She literally transformed her own classroom into a laboratory for a whole new kind of education. Oh, I just love this quote. She uses the metaphor of welding. Think about that. It's not some gentle mixing. It's an active, difficult, and totally creative process. It's about the hard work of fusing different worlds, the world of theory and the world of lived experience, to forge something entirely new and incredibly strong. So her method, which she named in honor of pioneering anti-caste thinkers, was built on these principles. It was all about connecting learning to real life, putting marginalized students right at the center, and, this is so important, seeing students not as empty buckets to be filled, but as active, creative producers of knowledge themselves. So what did this actually look like day to day? Well, it meant moving way beyond traditional essays and exams. Her students became creators, investigating their own worlds and producing their own original, meaningful analysis. And just look at these incredible creative examples. Her students made a whole film about how cell phones were changing their lives. They produced a critical booklet analyzing media bias after a horrific caste atrocity. They even created a recipe collection that wasn't just about food, but about documenting these deep histories of pain, resilience, and identity through the memory of cooking. This is what knowledge in action looks like. Now, to make all this happen, Reed drew inspiration from what she called Dalit counterpublics. These are those vibrant spaces, like community bookstalls, local magazines, activist groups, where knowledge is created and shared totally outside the formal, often exclusionary walls of the university. And she brought that world right into her classroom. And all of this brings us to this really beautiful, simple question that gets right to the heart of everything she believed about education. This quote is just brilliant, isn't it? Reed argued that the problem isn't the student who doesn't fit the mold, the proverbial papu who can't dance. No, the problem is the system that only recognizes one single style of dancing as the right one. So the goal isn't to force the student to change. It's to revolutionize the system so it can finally see and appreciate the beautiful dance that's already there. Okay, so let's bring this all together. This all builds to a powerful conclusion, where Rage drew on the legacy of the 19th century anti-caste reformer Jyotirao Phule, who had a special name for true education, Tritiya Ratna. Tritiya Ratna, or the third jewel. What a beautiful concept. This is the idea that education's ultimate purpose isn't just to get a degree or land a job. Its true value, its real value, is that it gives us the critical tools, the vision to see the structures of injustice all around us, and then find the courage to start dismantling them. It's a tool for freedom. So when you boil it all down, Sharmila Reddy's vision was just profoundly creative and optimistic. She showed us that the most important, the most rigorous, and ultimately the most beautiful kind of knowledge is the kind that connects us, that builds bridges between different worlds, and that actively works to make our shared world more just and humane. And that really leaves us with a final question for ourselves, doesn't it? In our own lives, in our own communities and schools, what would it really take to stop building walls and start building the kinds of beautiful, strong bridges that Sharmila Reddy envisioned?